John, if someone wanted to start a sea vegetable farm, where would they go to get started, and to whom would they go to?
Maine Department of Marine Resources, aquaculture program, and it would be myself, Marcy Nelson, Flora Drury, Amanda Ellis, Cindy Burke, or Diantha Robinson. That's our staff right now. And we can help you through the process, explain the process, explain the application materials. We help people mapping. So Maine DMR would be the first place I would call if somebody wanted to get into any kind of aquaculture in Maine.
How long might it take?
Depends upon the level of controversy. If you want to get into any kind of farming, we have 3 different programs. LPA, or Limited Purpose Aquaculture License, is very small. It's only 400 square feet, but you can have up to 4 of those as an individual and be helpers on others. They are typically taking a month or so. Experimental lease, we'd like to get them to no more than 6 months if there's no public hearing. And a standard lease, we're shooting for a year. Again, that's all dependent on how much controversy, how long this public hearing might go, quite frankly, how many lawyers are involved. So it's variable, but generally we're looking at about a month, 6 months, and a year for the 3 programs.
Can you tell me something about how do the fees work?
Fees are structured, we have an application fee and then a lease rental fee. Starting on the small scale, the LPA, 400 square feet, is $50 with no rent associated with that. The experimental fee is $100 with $100 rent allocated proportionally, so it's half an acre, it's $50. $100 per acre per year.
Yeah.
Yep, $100 an acre a year. And the standard lease application is a $1,500 application fee. Also $100 per acre per year. Duration is a little different. Small one is good for a year, annual basis. Experimental lease, the $100 fee is good for 3 years. And the standard lease, the $1,500 fee, is now good for 20 years.
And are they refundable?
They
If you don't
They are
get
not
approved?
refundable if you don't get it. And part of that is there's still going to be the investment of the state to administer the whole program, to administer the application review, to administer the public hearing, make a decision. So no, by law, those are non-refundable.
Okay, great. And so it sounds like then if you were to start in the fall for a standard application, can you explain the process a little?
Yes, standard application, because it's quite large, they can be up to 100 acres in size, duration of 20 years. There's quite a process. Back in 2003, a pre-application requirement was induced or created. That means the applicant, the DMR representative, and a town representative get together and talk about...
Like a harbor master.
Like a harbor master, maybe
Yeah.
a select board, get together and talk about things sort of conceptually. After that pre-application meeting, there is a scoping meeting, which is open to anyone in the public. And that again is to just discuss things conceptually. And an applicant may decide to move forward exactly as planned. They may decide to modify their proposal based on what they're in the scoping session, or they may decide to drop the idea entirely. Once that scoping session is conducted, then an application is submitted. Application is reviewed for completeness. If it's deemed complete, it goes out to state and federal agencies for their review. DMR staff is required by law to visit the site, characterize the ecology, the other uses of the area. We'll map it, distances to shore. We'll make contact with perhaps local harbor masters or marine patrol. We typically dive the site and videotape the bottom. We will put together a report and then it goes to public hearing. And the public hearing is much like a court case where a DMR staff person will make a decision as to whether or not it meets the decision criteria. If it meets all 10 decision criteria, the lease is granted and we're good to go.
So let me ask you, say you go through that process and then you decide a year later, I'd either like to add an acre or I'd like to move my farm to the other side of the river. What do I do?
Right now, if you are allowed a 25% or 4-acre expansion, whichever is less, but that's the limit that we're allowed to do by law. That was changed this year.
Yeah.
If you want to move to the other side of the river, indeed you are starting the process over.
So best to get it right the first time.
Best to get it right the first time, and one of the benefits for people who are just getting started and unsure about their desire and their commitment and how the neighborhood is going to receive them, we see people frequently getting the small LPAs, getting known, then moving into an experimental perhaps, and then moving into a standard. The most important thing to do is do your homework, as you well know, both biologically and socially, before you invest that time and energy in $1,500. Find out it's not the right place.
Yeah. So that's the application to DMR. What about federal agencies?
Yep.
Where do they fit in?
Since the origin of this program in the mid-1980s, my predecessor, Larice Churchill, got together with the state and federal agencies, and we created what's called one-stop shopping. One application is submitted to Maine Department of Marine Resources. That then gets distributed to state and federal agencies, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, state parks, conservation, DEP. At the federal level, the Army Corps gets involved if there are structures, and they meet every 3 weeks with their sister federal agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, EPA, even FAA recently, and they will review it as well as part of the core permit, which is required if you're using any kind of structure at all. So it gets a thorough review by state and federal agencies. One application is submitted.
What are the common mistakes made in applying for the first time around that has to be deemed incomplete? Are there any do's and don'ts?
Yeah, one thing is feel free to contact staff at DMR if you have questions. One of the things over time that sort of surprises me when an application says, describe the kind of gear you're using and give us dimensions, and we get an application and there are simply no dimensions. Or provide a tax map of local landowners in the area, and there is no tax map. Fundamentally, the application, while not being perfect and is subject to improvement as we speak, the biggest problem is people not reading through the application with detail. And what I suggest with people is when you think you have it right, grab a friend who knows nothing about it at all and have them take a look at it. Because frankly, what we see is some omissions that are clear in the application. The other thing is people, fudging isn't the right word, but lack of full disclosure. Yeah, I'm going to put things in the water. Well, could you be more specific than things, please? So there's no way to really sheet the system, which isn't the right term, but everybody wants this information. The public has a right to deserve the information, to accept the information and hear about it. Do your homework, contact DMR, do your application thoroughly and completely as you can, and if you have questions, call somebody who's knowledgeable.
Does an applicant have to hire an engineer, for instance, to
No.
do drawings?
No, we have literally had applications done in crayon. We have had
Crayola?
I don't know if it was Crayola or not. I saw someone lying in front of their TV with their jammies on, coloring the vicinity map. No, you do not need an engineer for your survey. We will come out with WASP GPS and locate your coordinates. Those can be subject to change until we go to public hearing, and the application is deemed complete. Once it's deemed complete, we will go out and verify those coordinates with you. You do not need to hire an engineer. You do not need to hire a marine biologist to characterize what you know about the bottom. Talk to people who you think might be familiar. Drop an anchor down to the bottom, and if it comes up muddy, it might be a mud bottom. If it comes up clean, maybe it's a sandy bottom. We require current information. You do not need to put in a full storm current meter. Is it 1 knot? Is it 2 knots? Is it 5 knots? Is it dead water most of the time? So we are looking for your best knowledge, and through the process, we'll gain more information.
Tell me about types of conflicts with other stakeholders that you run across.
For all aquaculture or just seaweed?
Well, seaweed and shellfish.
Okay, seaweed and shellfish. Other use of the area, it's Maine, so lobstering is always the big key. One of the benefits with seaweed aquaculture, the way it's being conducted right now, it is a winter crop when lobstering is more offshore, so that conflict is greatly minimized. It also minimizes winter use of recreational sailboating or boating activities that might take place because the gear is not in the water then. In terms of shellfish, it's those same things probably. Lobstering, existing fisheries, shorefront property owner access, navigation somewhat. The two things we do not consider by law, we're prohibited from doing so, is aesthetics, because what's beautiful to me might be something different from what's beautiful to you, and perceived diminishment of property values. Those are not one of our 10 decision criteria. So we have biological uses and we have social uses, and those two sometimes are in conflict with one another.
Let's say I've set up a seaweed farm. And I'm running during the winter, can the gear be left in year round?
You can, and the risk of that, many people are happiest, be it landowners or lobstermen or recreational boaters, when they hear that the gear other than mooring blocks are going to be removed, because it's not a visual impediment, it's not a navigational impediment, so they like that. An applicant is well within reason to say, I'd like to leave everything in, but they should be aware that potentially comes with consequences, like people objecting. Frequently with winter operations, we don't see a lot of objection. If they're going to leave gear and buoys in the water in the heavy use periods, they may encounter more objection than they otherwise would have. So it's choice.
How have the hearings for seaweed farms been going?
Hearings for seaweed farms have been non-controversial that I can think of. We've had, people are relatively accepting because of that winter use, and because ecologically seaweed is not only as benign but as beneficial as can be. So we really haven't had much conflict, but I'm not sure that's going to continue as the interest in seaweed aquaculture increases because of those social uses. People not wanting to look at it, people saying, well, we do work it in the winter. So far it's been pretty good, and I largely attribute that by being a winter crop only.
Do you see a lot of potential growth in the seaweed sector?
Huge amount of growth.
Because
the biggest constraint that I see, and others are probably better able to speak to it than I am, is market and being able to hold product. Biologically, I think there'd be nothing better than the Gulf of Maine, Casco Bay, Penobscot Bay, every bay around the coast to have more seaweed in it. Ecologically, biologically, it's good for the environment. We're looking at ocean acidification, we're looking at nitrogen loading in nearshore areas. Seaweed benefits all of that. It puts people to work. It's not in people's way in the summer months. So I think the potential for seaweed aquaculture in Maine is enormous. How much social impact that might cause at full build out remains to be seen.